So I want to thank you we want to thank you very much for attending. And this is only to say that this is the second panel of its kind in just 3 months, which is an illustration of how important and dynamic the subject is. If I think back to Leipzig in June when we were discussing new modalities for obesity, they were not the same necessarily modalities. And the number of drugs that have come into development preclinically are much, much greater than they were just then. So it's quite an exciting area. So we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Victoria English, and I edit and publish a 10 times a year publication on biomedical research, and it's mainly for the business of medical innovation. And I've been a journalist for many, many years.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be part of this panel today. My name is Elena Startseva. I'm Global Clinical Development Lead for obesity and MASH compound that Boehringer Ingelheim develops in the late stage clinical trials now. So we're running the pivotal phase 3 program. Topic very close to my heart and very much looking forward to the discussion. Obesity has always been eat less, exercise more for me as the physician being trained way back when. And now we're going into the totally new era and very much looking forward to the discussion. And over to you, Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Anna Beuchat. I'm with Roche Group, based headquartered here in Basel. We are a European Swiss company, but we have obviously a global footprint around the world. And the corporate business development group that I belong to, we actually help with licensing, M&A, different partnering discussions, and we try to bring in the external innovation, which hopefully many of you are working on, into complement our internal pipeline. So very excited to be here. I've been focusing on CVM since the last 2 to 3 years. It's, as Elena pointed out, been a very dynamic and exciting area. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Hi, I'm Jackie Iversen. I'm the co-founder of Sen-Jam Pharmaceutical. We are a company that is repurposing small molecules, putting them in combination for synergistic effects. And we have a platform of agents, and they work specifically at decreasing inflammation, which is intertwined into the metabolic space.
I'm John Rees. I'm a co-founder and chief exec of MitoRx Therapeutics. So we're a preclinical stage biotech developing small molecules that completely preserve lean mass and drive fat loss in obesity. And in data presented at EASD, we showed that we can increase lean mass in the industry standard DIO model, both as a monotherapy and in combination with GLP-1. Thanks.
My name is Jyothis George. I have the privilege to be the Chief Medical Officer for NodThera. NodThera is a company that's developing small molecule oral NLRP3 inhibitors by training. I'm a physician scientist, having treated many hundreds of people with obesity and diabetes, previously head of clinical development, medical and regulatory at Novo Nordisk, BI, and most recently at Amgen. I'm 8 weeks into my job, so all the tough questions I might have to follow up later.
Good afternoon. I'm Philip Larsen. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Six Peaks Bio, a company based here in Basel, and also funded here in Basel, coming out of the Iversen Ventures incubator Reachline, which is also based here in Basel. We're focusing on what you, with a short term, could call healthy weight loss agents, which is also muscle-preserving, lean mass preserving agent, leading to exclusive loss of fat mass. And we're destined to go into clinical development in about 2 months from now.
So just to take us back a couple of years, a couple of decades, there was a time when we all thought that obesity was purely a lifestyle issue. And in fact, it was considered impolite to call people's attention to it. And in fact, if you were a producer of clothing, you were very careful to make sure that the clothing was appropriate for the time. But recently, we've understood that it's actually a chronic disease. as defined by the World Health Organization. Now we're beginning to see that there's an inflammatory component. This was something that maybe people suspected years ago, but now we're beginning to see the evidence. And this is very exciting, and it's generating some new discoveries and new companies. And we'd like to start this conversation with two people on the panel that have a specific view on the root cause of obesity. Maybe I could start with Jackie.
Thank you, Victoria. So our company has been chasing inflammation and trying to figure out how to reduce inflammation. Particularly, our goal would be if we could reduce low-grade chronic inflammation, which spans all the way to the longevity research group, and is, well, when you have chronic illness, the majority, 60 to 70% of chronic illness is inflammation mediated. So if we just bring metabolic disease inside to that, it just fits along with everything we're seeing from cardiovascular and metabolic. But the source of this inflammation, everybody's trying to figure out where exactly is it coming from. And this inflammation that gets generated from your metabolics is also tied in with insulin resistance, and it's hard to say which one came first. What our platform does is that we decrease inflammation very high up in the inflammatory cascade. And one of the agents that we work with in this space of metabolic disease is that we're working with stabilizing mast cells. And you might not be familiar with what mast cells are. They're often neglected, but mast cells are very interesting immune cells. They are developed they're created right after the stem cell, and they're part of your innate immune system. And they go to barrier tissues like the lungs, the GI tract, and the skin. But when there's an organ of inflammation, they go to that location and they multiply, and they keep driving inflammatory processes. And there's no greater example of this than the adipose tissue and your adipocytes. When you accumulate all of the extra fat due to overnutrition, that these bundles of adipocytes, they form clumps and they generate their own inflammation, but the mast cell then joins them and multiplies and causes this inflammatory engine, and then they start calling in other immune cells like the macrophages. And so if we can stabilize these mast cells, then we have an opportunity to decrease greater fat store weight. And sometimes with the GLP-1s, you get a reduction of weight, but you're not getting rid of that final fat. And so this is almost turns into an organ system of its own that is extremely toxic and fibrotic. Plus, mast cells are also in your brain, and mast cell stabilizers cross the blood-brain barrier and can reduce neuroinflammation that is associated with the defendant's set weight point that the GLP-1s provide with you. When the GLP-1s stop being used due to perhaps intolerability or cost, then you gain that weight back. But if you can keep the microglia in your brain deactivated or reduced, then you have an opportunity of keeping the weight maintained off of you. So that's just examples of how mast cells can work.
So what is yours? It's a small molecule
Yes,
approach.
so what we've done in our products is we have taken a mast cell stabilizer, ketotifen, if you're familiar with that, and we've added it to a prostaglandin inhibitor, your nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory. And we're creating this very broad spectrum anti-inflammatory drug that is going to be safe enough for everybody to be able to use, and also accessible to everybody at a price point that could reach the entire globe. And that, I think, is very important as more and more of obesity is being diagnosed and metabolic diseases are being diagnosed around the world. And new chemical entities only reach about 30% of the global population.
And that is a great start for the discussion about the obesity cause, and thank you very much for that. And I'm also wondering, in the 8 weeks that you have been in the role, Jyothis, what is your view on but also from all of the years of treating patients with obesity, what is your view on the cause?
Thanks, Elena. I want to say whatever Jackie said, I would say, but no, I'll build on that, right? So the first thing is the most famous quote I can remember from all my obesity lectures is that overeating does not cause obesity, obesity causes overeating. If you're hearing that for the first time, just think about it once more, right? Overeating does not cause obesity, obesity causes overeating. What that means is there is a fundamental biological problem in the hypothalamus in how much energy you take in and how much energy you spend. And it's been 60, 70 years since people actually injured the hypothalamus, either physically or with inflammation, to show that you could actually create an obesity phenotype. Now, our company, although I've been with it only for recently, it's been going on for almost a decade, and they've made multiple oral small molecules. And the focus initially was on cardiovascular disease for all the reasons that Victoria and Elena said about there is a good reason why you would see cardiovascular improvement. In fact, we've actually generated clinical data showing inflammatory improvements in the CV setting. We've also generated neurological improvements, neuroinflammation improvements. Yet in those preclinical studies, it was accidentally observed by my preclinical colleagues that the mice actually lose weight. It initially was like, oh, what's actually going on with these mice? But it turns out that they actually are having a central effect with the hypothalamic inflammation going down and resetting the energy intake, energy expense balance. So I think Jackie spoke about the peripheral impact of inflammation once there is adipose tissue in the body. That sick fat actually secretes, cytokines, and it drives inflammation. It drives liver disease, it drives cardiovascular disease, and tackling that's very important. But that's only one part. Within 24 hours of animals getting exposed to high fat, you actually have neuroinflammation in the hypothalamus. So our approach actually is to treat people living with obesity with an oral brain-penetrant small molecule, which will be scalable to your point, Jackie. And we've also shown, at least in preclinical models, that if you do not have brain penetration, you do not actually have the weight loss. So it's very important to have this hypothalamic targeting. So like I said, we've got clinical data in cardiovascular disease patients. We've got clinical data in Parkinson's disease patients. We've got safety data in elderly volunteers. And we are doing 2 obesity trials, one as monotherapy with brain-penetrant NLRP3 inhibitor, and the second one as a combination of GLP-1. We hope to come back soon, 6 months' time, to actually report those data out.
Is frequently mentioned in the context of the Novo and Lilly products is, do they really free us of the right type of fat? And this has become right now quite an interesting area, because if we're not, in fact, reducing the fat in the way that is healthy, then we're not achieving the goal. And I guess John would have something to say about this, and also Philip as well.
I think the issue really comes down to why is it important that we try to focus these next generation therapies on fat selective weight loss? Why is it important to preserve the patient's lean mass? So effectively, because muscle mass is helping to set your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, if we denude the patient of their muscle mass through cyclical weight loss, we remove their autonomy to maintain a healthy weight without pharmaceuticals. So you leave the patient in a state where they're completely dependent on our industry, which in some senses may be attractive to investors, but it doesn't really fit the do no harm paradigm. And so for that reason, I think we should focus on what comes after GLP-1s. Of course, at present, the industry must be focused, the pharmaceutical industry must be focused on what it can combine with its current crop of therapies. But as buccaneering biotechs, we can bring forward the next generation of therapies, which can act both as monotherapies and in combination with these existing treatments.
Yeah, I mean, not every depot of fat is necessarily a curse for your health. Fat in the extremities around your thighs and buttocks are actually protective against cardiovascular disease. So the fat you want to lose is the fat around your it's the visceral fat. Fortunately, when you go on a diet, that's the first fat to lose. So in that way, nature is actually helping us. But fat is not only located within adipose tissue depots, it's also located in organs such as the liver, around the heart, around the kidney. And when you reach a certain size, or you are, I would say, cursed from a genetics perspective, and you start accumulating fat in these organs, that's when the presence of fat leads to inflammation and organ failure. And that's what, therapeutic intervention should try to address that. Obviously, most of the people who want to lose weight do not necessarily think about fatty liver or fat around their hearts. They want to lose it more for aesthetic reasons. And, there's still a lot of education to happen here. So you raised the question, how does Wegovy and Zepbound address that? They're actually really good at making you lose fat all the right places. The issue with these appetite suppressants is that they also make you lose tissue components you don't want to lose, such as skeletal muscle, such as some of your organs. And if you can prevent that loss of lean mass, of skeletal muscle in particular, I think we have, a future direction for actually a much healthier type of weight loss than what's currently offered with the GLP-1 agonist. I do want to emphasize that GLP-1 receptor agonists are really, truly innovative and is a blessing for people living with obesity because they do provide, advantages in terms of survival and additional health benefits. It's not that they're not to be recommended. They certainly do help these patients, but we can do more.
And that's a very good point, because we are actually, what is happening now in this panel, we're very much looking forward into the future, not only in passing, acknowledging the usual suspects and what they do to the weight loss, but actually looking at the additional health gains that we are expecting from treating the disease in the future. And with that, I actually wanted to pose my next question first, Anna, to you. Now that with the most recent deal that has shaken the metabolic world out there, with the 89 by acquisition, we are actually further putting the step forward into treating the obesity and adjacent diseases. What is Roche's approach to that?
Yeah, I can, thanks for the question. And also, I can only violently agree with my fellow panelists. There is still a lot to be done. So I don't know if it's common knowledge, but obesity is related to over 200 different comorbidities. GLP-1s are amazing. I think, it's the first thing that has really changed. What you guys also mentioned, how the society is thinking about this. It's a disease. It's not a bad behavior. So what we have done, and in case you are not familiar with the 89 Bio deal that we recently did, we've expanded into MASH. So that's looking into the liver fat that was mentioned as well. But it's not just the liver fat or other fat in general. I think if you think about the cardiovascular effects, again, it could be related to the fat around the heart, as has been brought up around. But there are many factors, I think, that we can still all address, and there's still a lot to do. We have cardiovascular, more dedicated, looking at cholesterol. We also have other foundations for those who, for example, cannot tolerate GLP-1s. There are now the amylins being explored. So combinations have been brought up as well, because there may be different pathways that we want to attack or bring together to attack together with different therapies to make sure that the patient benefit where what's troubling them the most. So I can only add that I think we still have a long way to go. And hopefully that's a message that everyone has heard. There obviously has been great scientific advances, but all of us on the panel or not in the audience, we're looking for other new ways to really help this patient population, which is still a huge number if you look at any of the statistics.
If I could just add to that, you spoke about different pathways, but I would also like to include the time into that too, because we can develop products that can work earlier instead of when tissue has already remodeled and organs have already remodeled. So I think when we learn more about the disease as a disease, we can also start looking at how we can prevent getting there.
Maybe just to piggyback on that. So if you think about it, prevention, I think we're all would like to head in that direction, but we have an existing population that have these problems. And for us, for example, with the MASH situation, it is one to reduce the inflammation, reduce the fat, but also there's a fibrosis element, which again, may need other things to tackle. So it's really bringing it all together to treat what the patient needs most.
I think, when you talk about prevention, often we get into the simplistic view of looking at obesity as we need to move more and eat less sort of prevention. But that is actually clearly important on the many, many decades of horizon. But I think building on what Philip and John were saying, there is also a need for secondary prevention. In cardiovascular disease, it's well established, right? Once you have a heart attack, you don't want a second and third, you actually give different treatments. In a similar way, when you actually had GLP-1s on board, they're fantastic drugs. You either have weight gain or you actually hit a plateau. You need something else to actually go on. So it therefore is not just a social construct of prevention. We actually want to look at prevention as a pharmacological approach too.
And that is very true, because we are just now scratching the surface of what eventually is going to be addressing the problems in metabolic health. And with that, I'm just wondering, Philip and John, where do you see the drugs that you are developing now, the compounds for muscle preservation, where do you see that in the paradigm of obesity treatment? Is that something that the patient should start right away with some other compounds in the combination? Is that something for later? What is your view?
My perspective is that you need to have your sort of the ideal patient in mind when you develop a drug. And what we do know is that especially people at a certain age are not receiving the therapy they should. There's some hesitation among prescribing physicians to really very aggressively up-titrate GLP-1 receptor agonists, simply a fear of inducing lean mass loss. So for the older patient population, those also living with much higher risk of, enduring obesity-related comorbidities such as cardiovascular disease, but other diseases as well, such as type 2 diabetes, liver failure, and what have you. There you need to have a therapy that spares the lean mass. And we're seeing that, with the recent clinical data announced by Lilly, with the BELIEVE trial combining activin receptor blockade with that of the GLP-1 receptor agonists, you have a really very profound improvement of biomarkers indicative of long-term sustained health. And that will help you understand, a certain therapy for certain people. If you go into the younger segment, you don't need necessarily to think about secondary prevention. You need to think about primary prevention. And again, I think sort of an underestimated driver for people getting on these drugs is a personal desire to look different. So the consumer health component needs to be factored in, because I personally don't believe that any society can afford paying, $2,000 a month for primary prevention in an obesity population that, on a global basis exceeds that of 2 billion. So you need to understand that as well. I simply don't think there is commercial viability in a primary prevention model for obesity.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and not get into the reads, but I think there are a number of different modalities here, and there are many in development trying to address the same problem. And I think one of the things that sets MitoRx apart is that we're restoring an impaired signaling event, and as a result, we're normalizing metabolism. And so some of the benefits are far more immediate, rather than resulting from the weight loss itself, but as well resulting from the weight loss. And I think in the context of what you can do with a modality like that, I think it's eminently appropriate for maintenance, potentially as a monotherapy. And I think in particular, given that we've been able to demonstrate we're not doing this through modulation of satiety, this is a therapy that is probably appropriate in certain sections of the population, such as those recalcitrant to modifying the behavior around food, or recalcitrant to exercise. Personally, I can attest to it took many years to get me in the gym. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, and that's an emerging insight. There is actually really poor correlation between degree of weight loss and that of cardiovascular risk reduction. Just want to emphasize that. Novo Nordisk at the ESD presented very interesting real-world data insights comparing Wegovy with Zepbound, and it's clear that the selective pure GLP-1 receptor agonist, which is from a weight loss perspective not nearly as efficacious as Zepbound, has a better cardiovascular protection than Zepbound has. So I think there is clearly something to learn from that, and we have to look at other parameters just than actual lost weight. We need to look into inflammatory parameters. We need to look into lipids and other well-accepted biomarkers of long-term cardiovascular benefits.
So you're commenting on the presentation from real world data. Is that right? The real world data, yeah. Because I called Lilly after this and asked them for a comment, and they said they thought the Novo design might be flawed in some way.
Yeah, and this is just one company trashing the other. I just want to emphasize that the first company that very convincingly showed the quality and the validity of real-world evidence was AstraZeneca, showing that the epagliflozin, an SGLT2 inhibitor, way before outcomes trials were actually conducted, would have long-term cardiovascular benefits. 3 years later, the data were presented. And you could argue exactly the same. I really think it's one company trashing the other.
Which is a very good point indeed, because this type of the data generation is inherently open to criticism. However, I wanted to now shift the focus to yet another aspect. What we know from the real world evidence is that the patients don't stay long enough on the drugs to actually fully benefit from the effects of these drugs. So I wanted to ask the panel now to reflect on why and what do you think is going to change that in the future?
I'll start. So the tolerability of the product is difficult. That's a difficult barrier for tolerability, and I'm talking about GI effects, not the tolerability of the price tag, which is also a barrier. And also, when they did the studies on these everybody was counseled on nutrition and exercise, and that was a big component of these studies. And now, as it's gotten into the consumer hands, that might not be happening with them modifying diet, modifying behavior. That was supposed to be part of it. But on top of it, this defended set weight that the products provide you with, lowering what weight you should be at, let's call it in your head, that goes away when the product goes away. And so now an individual feels that they want to get back to their weight. And that's part of the whole obesity being a disease that affects the brain. And so these are where other products can come in. It's the beginning, but there's definitely room for.
But I mean, the fact is that we don't really, we know what there is in the commercial data sets, and we know based on script renewal, how long people stay on therapy, but quite frankly, we don't know why they come off. We can speculate. I think tolerability is one thing, out of pocket pay is another thing. And maybe even, the fact that people reached what they think is their desirable weight is another thing. So more research definitely is required on really understanding why people are not adhering to the therapy for years. Because in type 2 diabetes, people stay on GLP-1 receptor agonists for way longer, but they also have hyperglycemia to treat. So there are different motivators, and clearly they have the same tolerability issues as people who take these drugs for weight loss.
Without disputing how impactful GLP-1s have been as a whole, taking a look at the Bloomberg terminal earlier, I could see data on GLP-1 cessation, and I think it was just 15% of those patients had achieved their target weight loss. I'd like to look at in more depth, but I think effectively, so I grew up in the 70s in the UK, and I remember there was a really toxic attitude towards people who were living with overweight and obesity. And to an extent, if we blame the patient for not doing the exercise or not modifying their behaviors around food, I'm not sure that's tremendously helpful, because you're dealing with a patient whose disease includes, for some patients, that they can't modify their behavior. And so I think it's our job to bring them these new modalities where it doesn't require that behavioral change in order to achieve a meaningful change in fat component. So the fact that I think there are now a couple of papers reporting at 2-year follow-up, patients who have been on GLP-1s for 6 months or more, the net weight loss was just 5.2 and 4.7%, although the American Society of Bariatric Surgeons were very keen on that last report. But these aren't vast net weight gains. I think there's a limited health economic case, and it really needs a variety of new modalities for patients and physicians to add, such as the ones being developed by the companies on this panel.
So I just wanted to mention a day ago, in preparation for this panel, I went through my inbox, and there was a press release from an Italian company called Rosalis, which has a preclinical product, which is an oligonucleotide targeting a microRNA. And they claim, based on this preclinical data, that it prevents a disease rebound after discontinuation of GLP-1 receptor agonists and sustains body weight stabilization beyond treatment. This is a statement from a press release. But it was delivered at a conference, and I'm sure that there are people who are now looking at this data and asking themselves whether the mechanism of action via a microRNA has something to do with the results that they've seen. I don't know.
I think, Victoria, maybe I'll start by saying I think weight maintenance has always been the biggest challenge for patients. Anybody in this room who's ever tried to lose weight by diet or exercise, you all know how quickly you actually bounce back in your own weight. That's the same thing for patients. Yet all of our investor narrative is around which is the biggest bazooka that will actually give you that immediate weight loss. Is it the retatrutide? You can almost see the headlines of the 2-horse race of who's actually trying to win. So just if you think of it from a patient's perspective, maintenance is very important. I don't want to comment on any particular one, but there are multiple modalities coming out where you actually prevent weight gain, and actually anti-inflammatory is one of them. My colleagues actually published that if you switch patients from GLP-1 in mice models to NLRP3 inhibitor, you actually maintain weight. A similar data is actually available for other companies too. But I also want to make one other point. It's not just about weight loss, it's about the health benefits on the long term. I think you mentioned the patient factors in discontinuation, the payer factors in discontinuation, but the reason why, at least I believe, patients with diabetes take the medicines forever is every few months there is an A1C check and they see a horrible doctor like you or me who says, control your A1C, and there is that reinforcing behavior. And I think we actually have to get to a stage where we actually let people look good on the short term, but also have long-term cardiometabolic benefits that are actually being tackled. So that's probably one thing that actually goes on to long-term treatment.
Maybe to tag on to that, I think one thing to keep in mind that we found is from a patient perspective, once you've reached your ideal weight level, or at least where you can get to with the current therapy, the part of the reasons why they may not want to continue is you have to think about these every time you inject yourself. We're coming up with oral options, but every time you take a pill, you are reminding yourself, I am sick. I am not well. And who wants to go through life like that? And so that's why many of us are working on this maintenance topic by looking at long-lasting, therapy possibilities. If you can take it once a year, once every 6 months, then you don't have to think about that every day. So that's definitely something which is promoting a lot of us to look further for solutions to address this maintenance aspect, to really think about, as a patient, and they are patients because it is a chronic disease. As a patient, how can we address what they need?
Which is a very good point, because for some of the obesity-related comorbidities that you have mentioned, Anna, almost 200 or even more than 200, quite a few of them go underdiagnosed until it's almost too late. MASH being one of them. It is silent until it's almost too late. And then the companies are doing a lot of efforts now, and there are some successes, of course. But that brings back the primary prevention, which I don't want to bring up now. You have covered that. And that is a hard topic to address.
We'd like to open the floor to questions. So please raise your hand if you'd like to query the panel on any of the topics that we've discussed so far.
One of the striking observations, first with Ozempic, Wegovy, was within the cardiovascular outcomes trials, how quickly the lines separate far before you have significant weight loss. What is going on with that? At this point, is it some anti-inflammatory effect, or just the fewer occasions of overeating, which is inflammatory in itself, or what?
Maybe I could start, because I was at Novo when Select was being done, and it's been 10 years since I did my first GLP-1 outcome trial. The answer is we do not know, but it cannot be weight dependent, because those curves actually separate before the weight actually comes in. And I believe Novo is actually working on a mediation analysis of what factors actually drove that effect. And clearly, inflammation does actually come up as a factor that's driving it. And then you actually ask, why are people on this panel still working on inflammation? Because weight loss will actually drive CRP and inflammation reduction to a degree. So with GLP-1s, you typically get in the region of a 1/3 reduction from a baseline. In contrast, an IL-6 blocker, an IL-1 blocker, or an NLRP3 inhibitor is talking about 70-80% reduction. So in terms of severe risk, you are taking somebody with maybe 6-7% of having a heart attack to less than 2%. So there is a dramatic difference. So there is one hypothesis that inflammation is driving it. Of course, I'm biased. The other factors include acute calorie load, sugar and salt load, all of this actually go in together with this thing. But Philip, you also spent many years on GLP-1s.
Absolutely, and I do think the anti-inflammatory effect is certainly a part of it. But the question is that because GLP-1 receptor agonists have a direct effect on white blood cells, or is that secondary to the fact that you lose, especially your visceral adipose tissue, which is the first to lose, and that's commonly associated with a pretty massive drop in high sensitivity CRP.
The debate today is perhaps like in the next year and two is more about dosing convenience, maybe moving to once a month, maybe oral. And then, of course, at some point, the muscle preservation or lack of muscle loss, etc. Where do you stand on this? You know, these weeklies don't seem to have a problem getting market share. And I don't think anybody's complaining about having a weekly injection, particularly with a pen that you hardly see the needle. You don't quite feel it going in, from my experience at least with the Lilly pen. Where do you see this going? Is this, have we reached, is that going to help by having a monthly or an oral? And where does it help?
Maybe just to start the discussion, optionality. You know, if you have no option right now to get the weight loss you want or the side benefits, you're going to take it. If you have other options, there may be others some that would choose one, some that would choose others. So I think, again, thinking about the patient perspective, we're offering, especially in this area where it's a consumer market in many aspects, to offer possibilities for the patient. But that's not to say that we're not thinking even further beyond just the convenience aspect. That's why, on this panel as well, we're thinking of new MOAs to tackle different aspects to try to reach medical value that is not currently being addressed or enough addressed by the GLP-1s.
You're a Bloomberg analyst, so I'll just put some numbers behind it. So every time you assume a billion patient market is homogeneous, we're making a mental arithmetic error, right? So it's going to be multiple segments. Within that billion, there'll be some people who will actually pay an absolute premium to get once a year and not think about the disease. For many other people, twice daily might be perfectly fine. So I think it's going to segment into multiple things. The best analogy I've actually heard is 25 years ago, we thought about treating cancer. Then cancer became tissue cancer, then became cell cancer, now became genotypic cancer. It's very likely that obesity becomes obesities, and each one of them with their comorbidities will have its own signature treatment.
Yeah, quite interesting actually, what to do if people are obese, yeah. But I think, we should try to prevent obesity. And this is, I think, the major issue. And then we have to start pretty early. And I don't know whether any of you have an idea, because I think one thing is education. That's definitely, the question is, what can one do actually to start, 6, 7, 8 years or whatever it is, yeah, to in some way not, and obesity is just, it's a serious problem worldwide, yeah. But we have to start earlier because, all what we do here is great actually, and pharma might actually also get some credit on that and make some money. But I think we have to do that in a different way. I don't know whether any of you want to answer that.
I think I do. So kind of taking a very different approach of how can you get anti-inflammatories into people who don't understand, like, why would I take an anti-inflammatory? To prevent obesity, right? Like, if I don't have it, why take it? So what we decided to do was to develop an over-the-counter medication that you could take after you overindulge. So it's first came out for overindulgence of alcohol, which is not a small thing because we have 2 billion people on the planet who drink alcohol. 60% of adults in the United States do. And alcohol is also a huge driver of inflammation. You take 1 tablet before you drink and it reduces those effects of alcohol inflammation. So we decided to try it on food that is high in sugar, high in calories. And you get symptomatic relief from an overindulgence episode. And so if people maybe could start taking anti-inflammatories around poor behavior, we'll call it, then maybe that this idea that inflammation being the source could take hold.
Could I just build on a slightly controversial response to your question? Because if this was a panel on obesity and, on cervical cancer, there wouldn't be a question about having education about better sex practices in the world or protective sex. So why I'm saying that is actually there's always a subliminal bias in obesity. People who are not yet obese, absolutely we have to do primary prevention, we have to do, but there is 1 billion people out there for whom the life expectancy is significantly shorter, right? So I think there should not be a competition between prevention and treatment. They should actually go hand in hand. So sometimes we just forget that.
And I mean, there is a solution to it, because one of the wealthiest countries in the world is also the leanest country in the world, and that's Norway. So, I mean, just live like they do in Norway.
With that, I would like to thank the panelists for a great discussion. I think we have established the status quo, and we had a glimpse into the very exciting future with all of the things that we all are working on. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for the engagement and questions, and looking forward to reconnecting. Thank you.